What if the silence you are afraid of is actually the space where your transformation begins? What if the person you keep wondering about, the person who pulled away, stopped responding, disappeared emotionally, or seemed completely unaffected, one day looks around and realizes something has changed? You are no longer there. You are no longer sending the message. You are no longer checking whether they viewed your story. You are no longer trying to explain your heart. You are no longer asking, what can I do to make them come closer? And that is where everything changes. Because sometimes people don't recognize the value of your presence while your presence is constantly available. They become accustomed to your attention. They become accustomed to your patience. They become accustomed to knowing that if they disappear, you will eventually return. But when you stop chasing, not as a manipulation, not as a strategy, but because you finally understand your own worth, the entire emotional equation changes. Listen carefully. You were never created to spend your life convincing someone to recognize what you bring to their life. You were created with purpose. You were created with gifts. You were created with a destiny that is bigger than one person's hesitation. And there comes a moment when you have to stop asking, how do I get them back? And start asking, who am I becoming? That question can change your entire life, because the strongest thing you can do is not make someone miss you. The strongest thing you can do is become unavailable for the version of love that requires you to abandon yourself. Think about what happens when you stop chasing. At first, there may be silence, and that silence can hurt. Your mind may tell you they don't care. Your fear may say they have forgotten me. Your emotions may whisper, maybe I wasn't important. But emotions are not always evidence. Sometimes silence is simply silence. Sometimes people need distance to process what they couldn't process while they were inside the relationship. And sometimes the person who appeared completely detached begins to encounter memories they thought they had buried. A song plays, a familiar place appears, a random photograph surfaces, a conversation reminds them of you. They meet someone else and realize the connection doesn't feel the same. They experience a difficult moment and remember who once understood them. And suddenly, the absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. But understand this, you cannot build your life around waiting for that moment. That is the trap. You cannot say, I'm going to become stronger so they will come back. No. Become stronger because you are supposed to become stronger. Become healthier because your future requires a healthier version of you. Build your confidence because you were never meant to live dependent on another person's validation. Find your purpose because your purpose existed before that relationship and will continue after it. This is where real power begins. You stop making their behavior the center of your universe. You stop waking up asking what they are thinking. You stop analyzing every silence. You stop treating every notification like a message from destiny. And instead, you begin to say, my life is moving forward. That's when your energy changes. And people can feel when someone has genuinely changed. There is a difference between pretending not to care and genuinely becoming at peace. Pretending says, I hope they notice that I don't care. Peace says, whether they notice or not, I am still moving forward. That difference is enormous, because if you are still secretly waiting for them to chase you, you are still emotionally chasing them. You have simply changed the method. Real freedom happens when their decision stops determining your emotional temperature. If they reach out, you are grounded. If they don't, you are grounded. If they apologize, you are grounded. If they remain silent, you are grounded because your foundation is no longer another human being. Your foundation is your purpose, your values, your growth, your faith, your relationship with yourself. And if you believe in divine timing, understand something powerful. Divine timing does not require you to sit beside the door waiting for somebody else to knock. Sometimes the door closes because you were standing in the wrong room. Sometimes separation reveals what attachment was hiding. Sometimes losing access to someone gives you access to yourself. And sometimes the greatest answer to your prayer is not getting the person back. Sometimes the answer is becoming the person who no longer needs to beg anyone to stay. That is transformation. Now, does an avoidant always come back when you stop chasing? No. And you must be honest enough to hear that, because your growth cannot become another technique for controlling someone else's behavior. You cannot manipulate love into existence. You cannot force emotional readiness. You cannot make someone choose vulnerability. You cannot manufacture commitment, but you can choose yourself. You can choose dignity. You can choose boundaries. You can choose healing. You can choose to stop giving unlimited access to someone who offers limited emotional availability, and if one day they return, let them meet the new version of you. Not the version who was desperate for reassurance, not the version who accepted crumbs because they were afraid of losing the whole meal, not the version who kept explaining why they deserved basic consideration. Let them meet someone who has learned something profound. I can love you without abandoning myself. That is maturity. That is strength. That is emotional freedom. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about growth is that you eventually stop needing an outcome. You stop saying, I need them to regret losing me. You stop saying, I need them to chase me. You stop saying, I need them to realize my value. Instead, you say, I know my value. And when you know your value, you don't have to advertise it. You don't have to prove it. You don't have to chase someone down the road demanding that they recognize it. You live it. You walk differently. You speak differently. You choose differently. You tolerate differently. You love differently. And suddenly, your absence isn't a strategy. It is simply the natural consequence of your self-respect. Maybe they notice, maybe they don't. But you notice. You notice that you are sleeping better. You notice that your mind is becoming clearer. You notice that your confidence is returning. You notice that your dreams are becoming important again. You notice that you are laughing again. You notice that your world is becoming bigger than one relationship. And then one day, you look back and realize, I thought I was waiting for them to come back, but I was actually waiting to come back to myself. That is the breakthrough. Because the person you were chasing was never supposed to become your entire identity. Your life is bigger than their silence. Your future is bigger than their hesitation. Your purpose is bigger than their inability to communicate. And your worth is bigger than whether somebody chooses to recognize it. So stop chasing, not to make them chase you. Stop chasing because you are done abandoning yourself. Stop chasing because your energy belongs somewhere meaningful. Stop chasing because you have goals to build, people to love, dreams to pursue, character to develop, and a future to create. And if they return someday, let them return to a person who has grown. Let them discover that your silence was not revenge. It was healing. Your distance was not punishment. It was protection. Your absence was not manipulation. It was self-respect. And your growth was never about making them regret losing you. It was about making sure you never lose yourself again. So walk forward, trust the process, trust the lessons, trust the timing. And above all, trust that what is truly aligned with your life will never require you to destroy your peace just to keep it. You don't need to chase what is meant to meet you. You don't need to beg for what is capable of choosing you. And you don't need to convince the right person of your worth. Become so deeply rooted in who you are that whether they return or never return, you still rise, you still grow, you still love, you still build, you still believe. Because the greatest victory isn't making someone finally chase you. The greatest victory is reaching the place where you no longer need anyone to chase you to know that you are worthy of being chosen. Choose yourself and keep moving. Because your life is not waiting for somebody else's decision. Your life is happening now. There is a moment in every relationship when you have to ask yourself a question that can completely change your life. What happens when I stop trying to make someone choose me? Because sometimes the person you are constantly pursuing becomes comfortable with your pursuit. They know you will send another message. They know you will check in. They know that when they create distance, you will close the gap. And because your attention is always available, they never have to fully experience what your absence feels like. But the moment you stop chasing, something changes. Not because you are playing a game, not because you are trying to manipulate them, not because you want to punish them. You stop because you finally understand that love should never require you to constantly prove your worth. When you stop chasing, you create space, and space has a way of revealing truths that constant communication can hide. An avoidant person may initially feel relief when you stop pursuing them. They may believe that the distance is exactly what they wanted. They may continue with their routine, convince themselves that everything is fine, and even appear completely unaffected. But time has a way of exposing what immediate emotions conceal. When your messages disappear, they notice. When your attention disappears, they notice. When the person who was always available suddenly becomes unavailable, they notice. And eventually, the question can begin forming in their mind. Why aren't they reaching out anymore? That question matters because it forces them to confront something they could previously avoid, your absence. For so long, they may have been focused on escaping emotional pressure. But when you stop chasing, there is no longer someone standing behind them asking for an explanation. There is no emotional conversation they can immediately run away from. There is simply silence. And silence can become a mirror. It can make a person remember the conversations they ignored. It can make them reconsider moments they dismissed. It can bring memories back when they least expect them. But here is where you must become powerful. Do not stop chasing simply because you want them to chase you. That still makes them the center of your life. Stop chasing because you are ready to become the center of your own life again. There is a difference between withdrawing to get a reaction and stepping back to regain your peace. One is strategy, the other is transformation. When you genuinely stop chasing, your energy begins returning to you. You start investing in your goals again. You start taking care of yourself. You start rebuilding your confidence. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop wondering what their silence means. You stop interpreting every little action, and slowly something beautiful happens. You become less emotionally dependent on an outcome you cannot control. That is freedom. And sometimes, ironically, that is also when the other person begins to recognize what your presence actually meant. But whether they recognize it or not, you have already won something more important. You have reclaimed yourself. Never forget this. You cannot control whether someone comes closer, but you can control whether you continue abandoning yourself while waiting for them. Your life was not designed to be spent chasing someone else's attention. You have dreams. You have purpose. You have potential. You have a future that requires your energy. So let your absence mean something, not because you want someone to suffer, but because you have finally decided that your presence is valuable. If they return, let them meet a stronger version of you. If they don't, keep walking, because the ultimate transformation is not when they finally chase you. It is when you realize you no longer need to be chased to know that you are worthy. There is something you must understand about silence. Silence does not always mean the absence of emotion. Sometimes silence is simply the place where emotions are being avoided. A person can stop talking and still remember everything. They can create distance and still feel the weight of what happened. They can look calm on the outside while experiencing an internal battle they never show anyone. This is especially important when you are dealing with someone who has learned to protect themselves through emotional distance. When feelings become overwhelming, some people don't move closer, move away. They convince themselves that distance will restore control. They tell themselves that they are better alone. They become busy. They become distracted. They bury themselves in work, routines, entertainment, or other responsibilities, but buried emotions are not necessarily gone emotions. What you refuse to process does not automatically disappear. Sometimes it waits. It waits in the quiet moments. It waits late at night when distractions disappear. It waits when a familiar song suddenly plays. It waits when they walk past a place connected to the relationship. It waits when they meet someone new and discover that the emotional connection isn't what they expected. And suddenly, memories begin returning. That is why you should never assume that someone's silence means they have forgotten you. But you also must never assume that their silence secretly means they are coming back. Both assumptions can keep you trapped. You don't know what is happening inside another person's mind unless they communicate it honestly. And that is where your power begins. Instead of obsessing over what their silence means, ask yourself what your silence can teach you. Because while they may be avoiding their emotions, you have an opportunity to face yours. You can ask yourself why you were willing to chase someone who was running away. You can ask why their attention became connected to your sense of worth. You can ask why their withdrawal made you feel like you had to work harder to earn love. These questions are uncomfortable, but they are transformative. Sometimes the relationship becomes the mirror that shows you where you have been abandoning yourself. And when you see it, you have a choice. You can continue chasing, or you can begin healing. You can continue checking their social media, or you can redirect that attention toward your own life. You can continue creating imaginary conversations in your head, or you can create real conversations with yourself about the future you want. This is where silence becomes powerful, not because you are using it against someone, but because you stop using your energy to fight reality. If someone needs distance, let them have distance. If someone chooses silence, don't destroy your dignity trying to force words from them. Give people the freedom to reveal themselves through their choices. And give yourself the freedom to respond through yours, because sometimes the greatest message you can send is not a paragraph. It is your life. Your discipline says something. Your growth says something. Your peace says something. Your boundaries say something. Your ability to keep moving forward says something. And if someday they begin replaying the relationship in their mind, that is their journey. You do not have to orchestrate it. You do not have to remind them of every beautiful moment. You do not have to convince them that what you shared mattered. If it mattered, they will eventually have to confront that truth themselves. But your responsibility is different. Your responsibility is to confront your own truth. You deserve relationships where communication is possible, where affection does not feel like a reward, and where your presence is valued without constant pursuit. So don't fear the silence. Let it reveal what it needs to reveal. Let it expose what you need to heal. Let it create space for something greater. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean the story is over. Sometimes it means the story has entered a chapter where both people must finally face themselves. And regardless of what happens next, make sure you come out of that chapter stronger, wiser, more grounded, and more deeply connected to your own purpose. There is a difference between someone noticing that you are gone and someone finally understanding what your presence meant. And sometimes that understanding does not happen until you stop giving your energy away so freely. When you are always available, people can become accustomed to your presence. Your messages become expected. Your attention becomes normal. Your encouragement becomes something they assume will always be there. Even your patience can become invisible because it is constantly available. But when you step back, the pattern changes. Suddenly, there is no message waiting for them. There is no person checking whether they are okay. There is no one trying to repair every moment of distance. There is no one constantly asking, what happened? And that absence can create awareness. But understand this carefully. Your goal is not to disappear so someone will panic. Your goal is not to manufacture jealousy or create fear of losing you. Those are games, and games cannot build healthy love. Your goal is to stop giving unlimited energy to a connection that is not giving you the same level of emotional security in return. That is where your power begins, because when you stop chasing, your energy comes back home. You start putting attention into your body, your work, your dreams, your friendships, your family, your spiritual growth, and your future. You begin remembering that there is an entire life beyond the person who once occupied so much space in your mind. And something remarkable happens when you redirect your energy. You become lighter. You become calmer. You become more focused. You begin making decisions from self-respect instead of fear. You stop asking, how can I get their attention? And you start asking, what deserves my attention? That is a completely different question. If an avoidant person eventually notices your absence, let them notice it naturally. Let them experience the difference between having access to you and not having access to you. But don't rush back just because they suddenly appear interested. Watch actions, watch consistencies, watch whether they communicate differently, watch whether they are willing to take responsibility. Watch whether their behavior matches their words, because someone missing you is not automatically the same as someone being ready to build a healthy relationship with you. They may miss your presence. They may remember your kindness. They may think about the memories. They may wonder why you stopped reaching out. But real transformation requires more than missing someone. It requires emotional courage. It requires accountability. It requires communication. It requires the willingness to face the fears that cause the distance in the first place. So don't make the mistake of thinking your job is to trigger their realization. Your job is to become so committed to your own growth that their realization becomes secondary. That is the freedom you are looking for. Maybe they eventually look around and recognize the space you left behind. Maybe they finally understand that the person they thought would always be there has moved forward. Maybe they reach out, maybe they don't. But either way, your life continues. And this is where you discover something powerful. You don't have to be absent to become valuable. You simply have to stop overgiving. Stop explaining yourself endlessly. Stop begging for clarity. Stop chasing someone who repeatedly creates distance. Stop proving that you are worthy of basic consideration. Instead, let your standards speak. Let your boundaries speak. Let your growth speak. Let your peace speak. Because when you stop spending your life trying to convince someone else of your value, you finally have enough energy to build a life that reflects that value. And that is when your absence becomes meaningful. Not because someone else finally notices it, but because you finally notice yourself again. Sometimes distance does something that constant communication never could. It removes the distractions and forces a person to face reality. When you are always there, always explaining, always reaching out, and always trying to repair the connection, the other person can remain focused on the pressure of the moment instead of the meaning of the relationship. They can escape the difficult emotions because there is always another conversation, another message, another opportunity to postpone what they truly feel. But when you step away with dignity, the noise becomes quiet. And in that quiet, reality begins speaking. An avoidant person may initially experience distance as freedom. They may feel relieved because they no longer have to confront uncomfortable conversations or emotional expectations. They may convince themselves that walking away was the right decision. But eventually, the distractions can fade. The routine becomes normal again. The excitement of independence settles. And then memories have room to surface. They may remember the way you encouraged them when they doubted themselves. They may remember small conversations that seemed insignificant at the time. They may remember how safe certain moments felt. They may remember the patience you showed, the laughter you shared, or the emotional connection they were not ready to appreciate. Distance doesn't manufacture those memories. It simply gives them room to be heard. And this is why you must never underestimate the power of stepping back, not as punishment, not as revenge, not as a tactic to make someone afraid, but as an act of self-respect. Because when you keep chasing someone who is moving away, you create a pattern where you are constantly fighting for closeness while they are constantly fighting for distance. That pattern exhausts you. Eventually, you begin questioning your own worth. You start thinking, maybe if I say the right thing, they will stay. Maybe if I become more understanding, they will open up. Maybe if I give them more space, they will return. But love should not require you to endlessly redesign yourself to accommodate someone's unwillingness to communicate. You can be compassionate without abandoning your boundaries. You can understand someone's fear without allowing that fear to control your life. You can love someone while accepting that they may not currently have the capacity to love you in the way you need. That acceptance is not weakness. It is wisdom. And sometimes distance is the only environment in which both people can finally see the relationship clearly. They can see what they lost. You can see what you tolerated. They can confront their emotions. You can confront your patterns. They can decide whether they are willing to grow. You can decide whether their growth is enough to earn access to your life again. This is why you should never rush to fill the silence. Let reality speak. If they truly value the connection, their actions will eventually reveal that. If they want to repair things, they will have to participate in the repair. If they want another chance, they will have to demonstrate change. And if they don't, then their silence has given you an answer too. Either way, you gain clarity. And clarity is a gift, because you cannot build a peaceful future around endless uncertainty. You deserve to know where you stand. You deserve relationships where communication is not something you have to beg for. You deserve connection that doesn't constantly leave you questioning whether you matter. So let the distance exist. Let it reveal what is real. Let it expose what needs to change. And most importantly, let it transform you. Because sometimes God allows distance not to destroy a connection, but to create space for truth. And sometimes the truth you discover is not simply whether they will return. The greater truth is whether you are willing to return to yourself. That is the question that changes everything. When you stop chasing answers from another person and start building answers within yourself, you become stronger. You stop fearing the silence. You stop fearing their decision. You stop fearing the possibility that they may not come back, because you finally understand whatever happens next, you will be okay. You will grow, you will rise, you will continue. And that is when distance stops being something you fear and becomes something that serves your transformation. There comes a moment when you have to stop measuring your worth by somebody else's response. Because as long as you are waiting for a message, an apology, a phone call, or some sign that they finally understand what they lost, a part of your emotional power still belongs to them. You may tell yourself, I'm not chasing anymore. But if every morning you check your phone hoping they reached out, you are still waiting. If every silence makes you wonder what they are thinking, you are still giving them control. If your mood rises when they contact you and collapses when they disappear, then their behavior is still controlling your emotional state. And this is where you must reclaim yourself. Your power does not begin when they chase you. Your power begins when their decision no longer determines your direction. Think about that. You don't need someone to regret losing you before you can move forward. You don't need someone to realize your value before you can recognize it yourself. You don't need someone to return before you can rebuild your life. You don't need an apology before you can choose peace. That is freedom. Because when you release the need for their response, you stop living in emotional negotiation. You stop thinking, if they come back, I'll be happy. You stop thinking, if they apologize, I'll finally feel better. You stop thinking, if they admit they were wrong, I'll know I mattered. No, you mattered before they recognized it. Your value existed before they entered your life, and your value remains after they leave. This is not arrogance. This is self-respect. There is nothing wrong with loving someone deeply. There is nothing wrong with hoping for reconciliation when reconciliation is healthy. There is nothing wrong with believing people can grow. But there is something dangerous about placing your entire future on another person's willingness to change. You cannot control their emotional readiness. You cannot control their fears. You cannot control their timing. You cannot control whether they choose vulnerability or avoidance, but you can control your response. You can decide what you tolerate. You can decide where you invest your energy. You can decide what kind of relationship you are willing to accept. You can decide that love will never again require you to sacrifice your dignity. And when you make that decision, something changes inside you. You stop chasing certainty. You start creating stability. You stop waiting for someone else to validate your future. You start building it yourself. You put your attention back into your purpose. You strengthen your mind. You take care of your body. You deepen your faith. You improve your work. You reconnect with people who genuinely value you. You create goals that excite you. And slowly, The person who once occupied every corner of your mind becomes only one chapter in a much larger story. That is when you become dangerous to your old patterns because you are no longer desperate for an outcome. If they return, you can evaluate their actions calmly. If they don't, you continue forward. If they apologize, you can listen without immediately surrendering your boundaries. If they remain silent, you don't collapse. You remain grounded. That is emotional strength. And perhaps this is one of the greatest lessons life can teach you. You cannot force another person to choose you, but you can choose yourself every single day. Let your faith remind you that your life is bigger than one relationship. Sometimes what feels like rejection is redirection. Sometimes what feels like abandonment creates independence. Sometimes what feels like loss creates room for growth. And sometimes the greatest blessing is discovering that you can love someone and still release them. So stop waiting for their response to tell you what you should believe about yourself. Look at your own life. Look at how far you've come. Look at the strength you developed through the pain. Look at the lessons you learned. Look at the person you are becoming, then make a decision. I will not chase what refuses to meet me halfway. I will not beg for what should be freely given. I will not sacrifice my peace to maintain someone's temporary presence. And from this day forward, let your life be guided by purpose instead of pursuit. Because the moment you release the need for their response, you don't lose power, you recover it. And once you recover it, nobody else gets to decide what you do with your life. There is a difference between trusting divine timing and sitting still, hoping another person will finally decide to choose you. You can have faith without putting your life on pause. You can believe that what is meant for you will find you without spending every day staring at the door. And sometimes the hardest lesson is understanding that waiting for someone is not always the same thing as trusting God. When you are emotionally attached to an outcome, you may tell yourself, maybe they will come back tomorrow. Maybe they will realize what they lost. Maybe they will finally understand. And days become weeks. Weeks become months. Your life continues moving, but emotionally, you remain standing in the same place. That is not peace. That is attachment disguised as hope. True faith gives you the courage to move forward without knowing exactly what comes next. You don't need to know whether they will return. You don't need to know whether they will apologize. You don't need to know whether the relationship will be restored. You simply need to know that your life still has purpose, because divine timing does not mean everything happens according to your preferred schedule. Sometimes the delay is teaching you something. Sometimes the separation is exposing something. Sometimes the closed door is protecting you from something you cannot yet see. And sometimes the greatest transformation happens while you are waiting for an answer that never comes. You become stronger, you become wiser, you become more disciplined, you learn boundaries, you learn patience. You learn how to love without losing yourself. You learn that peace cannot depend on another person's behavior. That is growth. And perhaps this is what the season of separation is asking from you. Not, how can I make them return? But, who am I becoming while they are gone? That question can transform pain into purpose. If they return someday, let them find someone who has grown, someone who no longer needs constant reassurance, someone who knows what they deserve, someone who can love deeply without tolerating emotional confusion, someone who can listen to words but also observe actions, someone who understands that forgiveness does not mean ignoring patterns. And if they never return, let your growth still have meaning. Do not make your healing dependent on reconciliation. Do not make your transformation dependent on someone else's regret. Do not become stronger just so somebody will notice how much you've changed. Become stronger because your future deserves your strongest self. There is something sacred about releasing control. You can say, I don't know what will happen, but I trust that I will be guided through it. That is faith. You can say, I don't understand why this relationship ended, but I refuse to let the ending destroy me. That is resilience. You can say, I still care about this person, but I will not abandon myself waiting for them. That is maturity. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not that someone comes back. Sometimes the miracle is that you stop needing them to. One day, you may wake up and realize the person you were desperately waiting for no longer controls your thoughts. The memories remain, but the desperation is gone. The love may remain, but the fear is gone. The lessons remain, but the obsession is gone. And suddenly you understand why the season had to happen. It taught you to choose peace. It taught you to trust yourself. It taught you to stop confusing uncertainty with love. It taught you that you cannot force another person's readiness. Most importantly, it taught you that your life cannot be placed on hold for someone else's decision. So keep walking, keep building, keep praying, keep growing, keep becoming. If the path brings that person back into your life, you will meet them from a stronger place. If the path takes you somewhere completely different, you will be prepared for that too. Because your destiny is not dependent on one person's ability to recognize you. Your purpose is bigger than their silence. Your future is bigger than their hesitation. And your life is too valuable to spend waiting for somebody else to finally understand your worth. Trust the timing. But keep moving, have faith. But keep building, love deeply, but keep your boundaries. And remember this, what is truly meant to remain in your life will not require you to destroy yourself to keep it. Sometimes the divine answer is wait. Sometimes it is move forward. And sometimes the answer is simply let go and watch what becomes possible when you stop trying to control what was never yours to control.